Ladies and gentlemen, please silence your phones and hush your babies. The show is about to start.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon if you're on the wrong side of the world. Welcome to Nemo the Mormon. I'm Nemo. You can hear my guest giggling in the background because unfortunately, if you thought there'd be a reprieve tonight from the American joking and bashing, then you are sadly mistaken because you've got the two worst Brit Vengers for it with you tonight. Tonight's going to be fun. Tonight's going to be a laugh. You can see I'm in my casual linen, so let's see where the night takes us, shall we? I'm here with Peter Bleakley. Of course I am, because
Hello.
Who else would I be with? And we're talking about the ward that Mormonism forgot. Something that Peter feels strongly about. He's filled with rage and passive aggression towards the Mormon Church. So we've got a very fancy slide deck here. Ooh,
Classy. I love the minimalism.
That's my aesthetic right there. Minimalism. It's where it's at. You only need 33 items of clothing. Talk to me about it afterwards. So, welcome. We're going to talk as Julian mentioned a few live streams back. He talked about the guy who can't say the word beginning. If you've not seen that video, have you seen that video, Peter?
No,
the one where he's like the preacher who's like in the beninging he can't say the word beginning.
Is that like Ben?
So
I have seen Benedict Cumberbatch trying to say penguin.
Penguin,
so
yes.
That is a hoot.
He can't say penguin.
Yes.
It's a similar vibe. So in the beninging, the first Mormons in London from 1840 to 1845, Lynn Watkins Jurgensen, what a legend. She very kindly decided to research as part of her history degree, her master's in history, I would imagine. She decided to submit a thesis on the London Mormons in the UK, which is great because we want to know about the London Mormons. And this offers us our first insight into the beginnings of the ward that we're going to be talking about, Welling. If you've been living under a rock, then you may not have heard Peter talking about Welling Ward, ranting and raving about Welling Ward and the injustice that must be resolved with Welling Ward and their lack of a church building. Because they don't have one.
I will not rest until they have a temple.
And as we're about to prove, they've been around in one shape or another as a congregation since 1841. Is that right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. 1841. Okay. Madness.
Let's show the slide.
So here we have in Lynn's very helpful research, we have kind of the dates of the missionaries who included future presidents of the church, like Wilford Woodruff and Lorenzo Snow, came to London. They were mostly working in the north of England and having a lot of success there. And they were like, okay, let's have a go at the capital city. So they kind of first came and got organized in 1841. But it was tough. They did not find this an easy place to get converts compared to where they had been. So initially, they just begin with a London branch in 1840. And then very quickly after that, in 1841, a Woolwich branch is created on the 10th of October, 1841. And the ward boundaries of what was the Woolwich branch, later Woolwich district, are basically what is covered today by Welling Ward in the southeast of London. And so we have here the documentation of when that Woolwich branch was first created.
Okay, perfect. And do you want to just can we just talk a little bit as to why you think that why do you think they found it difficult in London versus the cotton mills of Lancashire? Because if it's not the cotton mills of Lancashire, it's the poor, impoverished people of London. Why did they find that difficult?
Well, one of the points that Lynn makes, is London this is early Victorian London. It's very poor. A lot of central London was extremely poor. The middle classes were fleeing to the suburbs already, and that was something that certainly took off later. Um, the dominant religion was quite skeptical, sort of non-conformist Christians, among whom they had quite a lot of success.
Okay.
Most of their converts were what were called non-conformists, but they had a kind of a rebellious attitude against authority figures and the
Hmm.
standard Church of England and establishment stuff. So they think for themselves. They're quite independent-minded. Um, it's kind of just like any capital city, really, this
Hmm.
hurly-burly of poverty and opportunity and wild ideas
A
going
real
around.
sort of melting
And it
pot.
almost feels a bit, yeah, well, we studied in Acts how Paul kind of went to Athens and had a really horrible time
Mm.
because it was this cosmopolitan, quite advanced philosophical melting pot of lots of different ideas,
You would
and
expect
he
things
just
to
sounded
spread
like
very
a
quickly in a city, wouldn't you?
yeah.
But I think
But I
they
think
actually
there's a lot of
spread more quickly in
competition.
rural communities. Because if so and
Yeah,
so down the road
yeah.
is the only person you and your family have known for generations, if they're doing something, there's
Mm,
trust that's
yeah.
built up in these well-established, long-standing
Mm.
families in these areas. I would imagine. Yeah.
And there's a lot of stories of whole congregations kind of joining together,
Mm.
aren't there, in the more rural areas?
Yeah.
There
You
are
know
some
the
bits
the
similar
United
things with the
Brethren.
nonconformists in London. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a tough gig anyway, and there's
Mm.
some really hilarious quotes from them sort of writing home about how difficult London was. Um,
Okay.
so this is just sort of follow up a little bit. So there was in the early 1850s, the Mormons start to move to Utah, and quite a lot of the members of the church in London went, and were pioneers. So almost immediately, in just a few years, you get people who become established as converts.
Hmm.
Some of them, by the time they're going to Utah, have been members for over a decade and quite experienced. We'll get to some of them in a minute. But you then have a consolidation that already by 1857 they're having to kind of simplify the number of congregations they've got. So they divide London into 5 districts,
Hmm.
and the West District has Woolwich, Dartford, Eltham, and Welling, and that's
Yeah.
basically the territory covered by Welling Ward today.
And I would like to
So where we're
say,
talking, yeah,
so looking at
mm,
that list, I do not see another
yeah,
unit on that list that still exists by the same name today.
mm,
The only one
yeah,
on that list from
wow, that's interesting.
1857 that still
Yeah.
exists under its same name is Welling. Now,
Mm.
some of these may, Croydon, I don't think Croydon is
Is there a
its own ward.
Whitechapel ward? Whitechapel? I
There
don't know.
was, but I don't think
Yeah.
there
Oh,
is
it's one of the
anymore.
recent cull.
Yeah, that's why
Yeah.
I said it, because I feel like that's the only other one and that's
Yeah.
just gone. But prove me wrong in the comments. If I am wrong, please bring that to my attention, because we're not here to spread misinformation.
Yeah.
And I might do a
Yeah.
quick Google out of guilt in a minute. But anyway, yes, certainly it's a very long-standing ward. So let's have a look into the
Yeah. So
missionary work at the
yeah,
time.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
read that while I do my
So
guilt
this
Google.
was yeah. This is Wilford Woodruff writing on the 2nd of September 1840, and he writes, London is the hardest place I've ever visited for establishing the gospel. It is full of everything but righteousness. And they really had a struggle, and they did get some converts initially. They then apparently almost all of them ended up being excommunicated or disfellowshipped at some point because there were a lot of strong-willed characters among the handful of London converts who kind of wanted to carry on doing things their own way because they were from this non-conformist Christian tradition where you kind of do church how you want to. That's the point. You're not conforming to an establishment denomination like the Anglicans.
Hmm.
So they converted some really independent thinkers, and it took them a while to rein them in, but a lot of them kind of worked through that and were reintegrated, and from then on were real stalwarts. So one of the points that Lynn was making in this, Lynn Watkins Jorgensen was making in her research was, although there weren't that many numerically converted in London,
Hmm.
and their reputation was terrible from these letters home, in fact, there was a little hardcore of really stalwart members who converted, and some of whom crossed the plains and went to Utah and contributed a lot to there, but
Hmm.
also some who stayed. And in a way, the story I'm telling about Welling is the people who stayed and carried on for the next 2 centuries against all the odds, keep maintaining this little flame of Mormonism. And
Hmm.
then how it really flourished while I was living in that ward for 18
Let's not get
years,
ahead of ourselves, Peter.
until a few years ago.
We will get to
But
this moment.
yeah, but it's been a struggle all along.
Hmm.
It's been difficult for these Latter
Who
Day
better to
Saints.
interrupt you than
Yeah.
your wife, who is watching? Our very own Mormon Freedom Fairy says Selsdon Ward covers Croydon. Quite
Yeah.
correct. And my guilt
Yeah.
Google
Yeah.
did reveal that Whitechapel Ward does still exist. So there was 2 wards on that
Yay.
list that are still
Yeah.
extant.
Fantastic.
They both still exist, but
Mm.
I mean, whether they'll both exist as wards for very long, who knows?
Yeah.
And yeah, I still think out of all that list, the fact there's only 2 going, and Welling being the
Mm.
older of the 2, I think it's quite telling.
Mm.
Next slide.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Here's
we've now
some of the
got
people that did
some
leave,
kind
right?
of. Yes. So the Willie Hancock Company was famous in November 1856.
Hmm.
The people the Mormon converts who crossed the plains in handcarts were the poor. They
Yeah.
couldn't afford a wagon,
Hmm.
basically. And the church worked out this formula that if they built these handcarts quickly and cheaply, and they were kind of given a food allowance that was actually very strict, and lots of the sort of nuanced and post-Mormon historical research recently has been that effectively these poor people were on a starvation diet.
It
And they
did
were
include a
treated
coffee
pretty
ration, though.
brutally.
Ironically.
Oh yeah, good.
Yeah, yeah. Some
Yeah,
of
well,
the
not
some
drunk.
of the pioneer sort of food makeup, what it involved coffee. So that whole little pot of coffee that she
You
kept
gotta
on the back of the
wake
stove,
yourself up in the morning.
if it's good enough for the
Yeah,
pioneers, it's good enough for
yeah.
the rest of us. Carry on.
So there were several of the really faithful London converts who'd been members for many years who joined this trek and were actually in the Willie Hancock Company,
Mm,
um, including branch presidents. One of them was the branch president of the Woolwich branch, which
mm,
kind of evolved into what is Welling today. Um, and there were 6 of the people from London were killed or died of exposure during that journey. And
mm.
what happened with the Willie Hancock Company is they left far too late in the year. It was very
Yes.
foolish. Lots of people warned them not to, but other people said, "But we're faithful. God will make miracles happen. We'll make it." And they didn't, and died in the snow. A lot of them. So John Griffiths, who was president of the Woolwich and Deptford branches, Deptford being a bit more to the left in southern London, and his 2 sons, John and Herbert, died on that journey. So that was just a
Mm,
real sort of tragic point in history. But again, how this ward, its branch president died as a martyr in this story that we constantly tell. So right from the beginning, there is 100% commitment from the members of the church in
mhm.
Southeast London to die if necessary for their commitment to this religion.
Okay.
Yeah, next slide, please. And there's sort of just some of the details with what happened
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
So it's quite a long list of London convert members who are in the Willie Hancock Company. There are a lot
Mm,
of them. That's just a first section, but it lists there which of them died. So yeah,
mhm.
next along.
Next along. Okay.
Yeah. And after those sort of converts went, the very quickly after polygamy was announced in the 1850s, um, and publicly, it was 1852 that Orson Pratt kind of stood up and who had been a British mission president and publicly announced that polygamy was a thing
So
after all
yeah,
years of denial,
those things said we weren't
which we've
doing. Here we
discussed
are.
recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're actually doing it and we're proud of it.
Hmm.
From that moment on, the convert machine of thousands joining in Britain crashed. And from then on, you have really tiny little remnants struggling against incredible negative propaganda around polygamy, which we discussed in our episode about the British pageant. And and we have kind of a little snapshot here that in 1876, I think this was written. This is a
Hmm.
description by someone of where the Mormons are actually meeting. You know, they don't have their own buildings so much. A few of them did, but often they're renting really awful, cheap places to get together. The principal place of worship of the Mormons or Latter-day Saints is in the Commercial Road, but there are others. One of them is in George Street, Gower Street. In that locality, there is a very shabby dancing saloon from which the graces seem long since to have departed. At 3 o'clock every Sunday afternoon, the Mormons assemble there. On a raised platform may be seen seated some 7 or 8 men, apparently decent workmen. All seem enthusiastic and very friendly, and wretchedly poor. You might fancy as you enter you had made a mistake and got amongst the primitive Methodists.
I mean, that,
And that just really spoke to me
yeah.
powerfully of sort of what they're putting up, because 100 years later, 1976, I'm doing exactly the same. I'm a child growing up in Tunbridge Wells branch in the Maidstone district at the time. We're renting Showfields Hall on the council estate in Tunbridge Wells. We begin our Sunday there, sweeping up the cigarette butts and the beer from the floor, mopping the floor from whatever party someone rented the hall for the night before. So weirdly for me, my childhood memories of sacrament meeting are everything smelling like an old pub, stale beer and ash and cigarette ash.
Hmm.
And we did that for years. And a lot of other congregations in Britain did. And then we started to get chapels built. You know, we reached ward size and the church started paying up. And Tunbridge Wells eventually in the 1980s got a lovely chapel to meet in. And this seemed to happen pretty much all over the country,
Except
except for Welling, except for a few,
except
and particularly Welling.
for Welling.
And here we have actually the specific date that Welling branch started as its own identity, which is the 23rd of December 1849. So
Hmm.
this was at a point where they have separate Woolwich and Welling branches and all of that. But later on, as actually church membership in the area declines in the 1800s,
Welling
it
absorbs
shrinks and
Woolwich.
shrinks until yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then in the 50s they created that district, you know.
Hmm.
And by the 20th century, the Welling ward covers what used to be the Woolwich district.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then we have this man.
Mm.
So some context
So in
before we bring
the
this up. Do you
Go
want me
on.
to? Yeah, yeah. So at the British Rescue,
You tell the story.
which we
Yeah.
talked about a lot. One of the things that seemed to go under the radar was Ballard came and well, we'll play it in a moment. But basically,
With
he-
Cook and Holland.
yeah, he came with Cook and Holland, and he spoke to almost spoke to the decline of the church and how the buildings should be fuller than they are, and if we can get them full, they'll make us some buildings, which got Peter indignant with rage. But let's listen to him, shall we? Right.
Incandescent
to-
is the word.
Ask you, would you like to give Jesus Christ a Christmas present? Every single one of you would say, oh, yes, how do we do it? I just told you. We can all give Jesus a Christmas present that he will love us for. Couldn't give him anything possibly as great as to bring a soul, another child of God, to him.
Just going to pause that for a second, because that is the tired old rhetoric that they tried in the UK of, if everyone just brings one more person to church, then we'll double numbers.
Yeah.
And we actually almost halved numbers in some stakes over those 10 years when we were challenged to do that. Anyway, let's carry on.
To be baptized
Yeah. Which was
as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now just think what you know as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Because you have the Restoration, you have the Book of Mormon, you have the Doctrine and Covenants, you have the priesthood and the authority and power of God, you have the marvelous women's organizations, the Dear Sisters, who teach and train in the auxiliaries of the church. You have this beautiful building that we ought to have so many people wanting to come to church. We have to have sessions all day long. Maybe you're doing that now. And I'll bet if it gets too bad, we can find you another place. We get another building somewhere. So God bless you to study the gospel, to love the gospel, to give it away, and to share it.
So we have a man saying that, oh, you should get it so busy. I'm sure we can build you another building. Anyone there from Welling must be livid to hear that.
Oh, I was
because
livid.
As we're about to come to, Welling was absolutely performing. And was it weird that he said, maybe you are now? He absolutely knows that they're not running meetings all day long in Hyde Park Chapel. He will have been told the state of Hyde Park Chapel when he got there as a visiting authority. So why is he stood on the pulpit going, maybe you're doing that now? Maybe you're not. Weird.
And we now know that he, yeah, and we all now know that a couple of years ago is when they first formulated the plan to start shutting down stakes all over London. So they had,
Yes.
I mean, what was so powerful there is they've got no new ideas. No new ideas. It's just bring a friend to church. And this was literally the year after the Europe area goal for 10 years from 2010 to 2020 had failed.
And can we please just pinpoint what you said there? Sorry to interrupt. I really want to pinpoint what you said there about this was the time. If we go back from Hans Boom announcing the 4 stakes, the 3 stakes around London that got closed, that got completely shut down, Wandsworth, Maidstone, and Romford? No. Which was the other one?
Oh, sorry, my brain's gone blank.
It was Maidstone. Anyway, right, they shut 3 stakes
Maidstone
down.
got merged with...
Put it in the comments. We've talked about this enough. Anyway,
Wandsworth,
Maidstone.
Sorry, Wandsworth, Maidstone. We've forgotten already.
And who knows what the other one was?
Anyway, out of mind.
But they closed 3 stakes. They closed 3 stakes. And what we do is when we go back, you saw that they were deciding to do that at the time they were over for that visit. So he knew they were going to be closing down, and maybe somewhere in the back of his mind, he's going, we can find another building for you because we're about to make some available by kicking some wards out.
I know.
Maybe.
Oh, gosh. So it's just this thing of, bring a friend, come, let's grow. You've got great potential here.
Mm-hmm.
That same old rhetoric that has completely failed. But he's talking about giving a present to Jesus for Christmas of a convert. And I'm like, give a present to Welling Ward. Just buy them a building. And we'll talk in a minute of the detail of how they tormented that ward. And then, when you grow, we'll provide you with a building.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you've got capacity, we'll do it. And they have not done that for 2 centuries for this poor congregation.
Not what they do.
So I was livid. It was just complete disconnection from reality. But as you say, they actually knew more than they were letting on. They were looking at the maps for all these things. Mm-hmm. And by then, Welling was already in decline for the reasons we'll talk about. It was just infuriating to hear him say that. I went nuts. So shall I talk just briefly about
I'm going to put you on
Welling
full screen
and could have been?
Because this live stream, I've given up trying to make this look like a polished article. Thank you very much to all 128 of you who have stuck with us so far. Really appreciate you all being here. I'm having a lot of fun just being here chatting to you all, which is great. And I'm watching the comments. I should get more involved with those comments. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put Peter up on full screen while I work out what that 3rd stake was that got closed. So Peter, you vamp while I do another. This is not a guilt Google. I don't know what we're calling this. This is a saving face Google, I think.
Fact checking. So Welling Ward grew. It grew slowly and painfully, like all the congregations in Britain. Became a stable ward, but was homeless basically. So meeting in schools, meeting in primary schools, meeting in secondary schools, meeting in all kinds of places. For a while, it met in the Blackheath Chapel, but then we're told, well, you're not going to get your own chapel if you stay here. You need to kind of create a local identity. So by the time I moved into Welling after marrying the daughter of the bishop in about 96, 97, they were meeting in a primary school, and then eventually they got a long-term lease on an office on Welling High Street, and kitted out the building nicely. So we kind of had a stable base for a while, but then that lease ended soon after I left there, and they are now meeting in a primary school. But at its peak in sort of the 2000s, there were around 150 people coming every week. It was a thriving ward, despite living out of a cupboard a lot of the time.
150
In
meeting
rented
at a primary
accommodation.
school.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
All right.
And multicultural. Like, we had at least 14 different nationalities. Really, we had six. I was mission leader for a while. We had 6 missionaries. They were going great guns. They were baptizing constantly. Our ward councils were mostly about trying to remember who got baptized that week and organize care. All the usual dysfunctions. The missionaries were mostly targeting people walking up Woolwich High Street and during the day. So middle class people with jobs they never met, which is an ongoing issue with how we do missionary work. So lots of migrant people, lots of transient people. So it's very hard to have converts become stable. But there were some real, totally faithful, good, awesome, 100% serving families that kind of were the core of the wards. But just it wore people out. It exhausted everyone. This constant struggle to not have somewhere sane to meet, not have somewhere nice to bring people to always have this uncertainty. So there started to be, people just started getting exhausted by it and going inactive or moving to other wards. So we, for other reasons, moved to the ward I'm in, and at least 3 other families ended up moving from Welling to ours next door. Just burnt out by it, and I was burnt out. I was doing 6-hour days, 7 hours as a ward clerk in Welling. But the point being, it was a big thriving community, and it had so much potential.
Well-
And this is a microcosm of what all of Britain was told. We were told in the 80s, if you work hard, each of your wards will become a stake by now. We'll have exponential growth. But for all the reasons we've discussed in previous episodes, they just
got one.
killed it.
I've
The
got it.
social life died. The dysfunctions on missions causing people to come home early, and
The church
just
the
get
church has bought a
disaffected.
building, Peter.
All the reasons.
The church
They
has bought.
have,
They have
so-
bought a building. Look, everyone, look, right? Just so I'm not making it up. I'm not making it up. The church just bought a building. Look, see, isn't that a gorgeous
yeah.
building?
Oh, that's
That looks.
amazing.
I think it's
Beautiful.
worth over
Ooh.
100 million.
Is-
So the
Is
church
it
has made a big
103 million,
investment.
Nemo?
Yeah, something like that. The church has made a big
Is that
investment.
near Welling?
It is. It's quite
Where is
close
all
to
the
Welling.
castle office block?
It's
it?
13 miles away from Welling. In fact, that's the primary school that Welling Ward meet in, and there's Older Castle there. 13 miles. It'll take you about an hour on public transport, just under, depending on how the trains are behaving. So what? Surely they bought that for Welling Ward, no, Peter?
Well, for a fraction of that, they could have got Welling Awards. But what happened in all those years was repeatedly state leaders, the building department, general authorities said, have faith, pay your tithing, keep praying, let's do a fast. And over again, the ward found land. They found land that would have been suitable to build on. We actually secured and purchased an old primary school at one point, ironically, because they kept renting primary schools. And then we were told, what was probably a massive lie, that the planning permission had been for a chapel that wasn't going to be big enough for our needs. Therefore, we'd reboot. We'd stop that sale and stop buying that land and look for land for an even bigger chapel, which sounded very fishy at the time. And since it seems they screwed up the planning permission or something, is the best I can find out about what happened there. And over it, we had a bishop who was an architect. We found lands that would have been a typical Mormon development, a block in a residential area, beautiful place. We could have bought the land, sold some of it for housing development. He created the drawings for it. But again, we didn't win the bidding war. And what was going on while people were being spiritually abused because they're being told if you were faithful enough, God would bless you with a miracle, and being told to fast and pray each time that these sales would be successful, the church was intentionally massively underbidding. They were not even offering anything close to market rates
Right.
for each of these plots
How
of
do we know
land.
this?
And we know this because one of the members of the stake presidency found out. He discovered and worked out what was actually going on here, and I presume that means the rest of the stake presidency knew as
Was
well.
he quite
And
upset?
this was actually, he was very upset, and it was one of his shelf breakers. It was a major contributor to a member of the stake presidency of the what was it? Yeah, Maidstone stake, and his family leaving the church. You know, he was also dealing with the other stuff like the Book of Abraham and everything. But this was a real disillusionment to discover what
Mhm.
was actually going on behind the scenes financially. And then we find out that the church had a massive fortune, had hoarded hundreds of billions of dollars of people's tithing money. And we as Brit Vengers started to pay attention to the church's declarations to the Charity Commission in
Mhm.
Britain.
So
And
then,
there were
can I
these
can
two
I
narratives going on.
can
Yeah,
I
go
raise a
on.
point then? So I just want to sum all that up to
Mm,
make sure we know where we are. So you've got a member of the state presidency
mm,
leaves because he discovers the church is massively underbidding for land, at the same time as promising
mm,
members that if they're faithful enough they'll get a chapel. So there's purposely subverting the promised blessings while
mm,
requiring members to enact
yeah.
faith to receive those blessings. So they're purposely getting in the way of members receiving an answer to their prayers, which is so abusive spiritually, I don't even know where to start. You've got that going on.
Mm.
And this place has been a hotbed of church activity, highest baptizing ward in Europe at one point.
In
Six
Europe for a
missionaries, so
while, yeah.
three sets of missionaries there doing good work,
Mm,
thriving community. 150
mm,
people is more than enough for a ward in the UK. Doesn't sound like it in Utah, but there are wards of 60 people here in the UK, right? So the
mm,
ward I grew up in is about 120, and it's now down to about 60. So that's all going on. Welling's been around since 1840s. So you would think with all that
before
when
Mormons went to Utah.
yeah, before Mormons crossed the plains, Welling has had members of the church worshipping there. So you would have thought, bearing all that in mind, that when the church buys a $129 million building 13 miles away, surely, Peter, that's what that building's for. It's to help Welling Ward. They're going to get, a space
Oh
in
my
that
God.
building to worship in. Or
I mean,
is that
they
building
they
the great and spacious building that represents pride, as Jason's been saying in the comments? And is it indeed just a real estate investment?
It is a gorgeous building. It looks like a temple inside. It has
Hmm.
this incredible foyer. It's high-end office space in London, and it's been bought as a commercial investment. And what you get from looking, one of the unique things that happens in Britain is to have its tax exempt charitable status, the church has to make annual declarations of its activities to the Charity Commission, which are public and online. And part of what they state is whether what sort of investments they are working on at the moment. And there's the story of trying to secure Alder Castle that goes on for several years. And we sort of heard rumors about this. There were all kinds of things about they were trying to develop a massive property, maybe make part of it a stake centre to kind of justify the expense. But eventually they buy Alder Castle, which is a huge property investment. It's 103 million pounds, which is, as you
$129
say,
million.
like 113. Yeah. And it's rented out as office space. You know, it's like their other Ensign Peak commercial investments. It's nothing to do with the
I think
religious
Barclays
work
has got
of
offices
the
there
church.
and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And they spent years working on securing that. And while they were doing that, repeat over and over again in their declarations to the Charity Commission, they say for the whole of the UK, we have no plans to build any chapels. Like there's specific wording in their annual declarations. We are not currently proactively engaged in securing a chapel for anywhere. At the same time as they're telling Welling and Welling's stake and ward leadership over and over again, yes, you are top of our list, you're a huge priority, we are looking for land for you, we will support you. But in reality, their declarations to the Charity Commission, they weren't doing anything of the kind.
So they were
I
lying
mean,
to the
it's
members of
absolutely
Welling Ward.
outrageous. They were lying, yeah. or to the government, but more likely the members of Welling Ward.
So
Though they really
putting
good at
together
both.
the
Yeah.
fact that they underbid for the land, that they kept dragging their feet and swapping plots, and that they told the charity commission they had no plans to build buildings. I think it's almost certain that someone was lying to the members of Welling Ward when they were telling them, "Don't worry, we'll get you a chapel." Which is just, it's a travesty when you consider
Absolutely.
that they spent 74 million, I believe it was, buying an Amazon warehouse, which so many Americans gave it all this, saying, "Have you never heard of a Bishop's Storehouse? That's what they're going to be." No, they continue to rent it to Amazon. The church has become a very wealthy landlord.
And that was in London, we should point out. That was
in London as
Wimbledon,
well.
I think,
The
or
church,
Wembley.
so my point
Yep.
there, the church has no problem buying property in London. It's a very expensive city,
Yeah.
very expensive, one of the most expensive cities in the world to buy property. You know, it's up there in the top 10 or 20, I think.
Yeah.
But the church
Yeah.
has no
They can
problem
afford
buying
it.
real estate there. They have no issue.
Yeah.
If
And-
their concern was, and I understand financial prudence and, you know, they shouldn't be massively overbidding for land, but you can understand when a unit's been there and a unit is thriving, for them to go, you know what, we're going to pay a fair market rate. We might even pay a little bit over market rate. We might use the fact that we're a big entity with lots of money to kind of throw our weight around in the service of our members and get them some land. You know, we'll outbid people, we'll pay a little bit over the odds, and we'll accept that loss, because the thing that's most important to them is helping members. Because what's the stated mission of church? Bringing souls unto Christ, and, you know, supporting people attending church would help them with that. But no, they're quite content for people to meet in a primary school, 30, you know, and then only 13 miles away buy $129 million worth of real estate.
You couldn't
It's
make it up.
sickening,
I mean, you
really.
just couldn't make this up, and it's and why it matters, apart from the betrayal of this congregation that has hung in there for generations, for 200 years, is it's a microcosm of what's happened across the whole church. They have absolutely not met the needs of the local members. They don't listen to the local members. They've just become a corporation, mostly concerned about massive expenditure on real estate. And saying whatever nonsense they have to the members to keep them praying, paying, and obeying. And a tiny crumb from that table, a small fraction of what they've spent on those two real estate investments that we know about in London in the last few years, Alder Castle and the Amazon warehouse, which adds up to £200 million. A tiny fraction of that would have got Welling a palace. And it also seems odd, because they have bought everyone else chapels, or a lot of other places. It's just very weird that they seem to have this mental block on what was their golden goose, the highest baptizing ward for a while in the whole of Europe. A thriving, multicultural, forward-thinking, amazing, wonderful, humble, spiritual. I mean, Fast and Testimony meeting in Welling was absolutely the best. People were real. You didn't get any of this sort of fake nonsense and people virtue signaling. These are people with tough, difficult urban lives, sharing their stuff, being there for each other. And it was a struggle with fantastic leadership. But we had all this potential. But now it's hollowed out, the same as has happened in most of the congregations in Britain. This neglect, the finding out about the financial scandals, the exhaustion, running systems that just aren't functional. The whole mission system is all being done wrong, all of it. Losing our youth means that Welling now is struggling. Welling is effectively branch size, and there are strong rumours circulating that the plan is to demote it to an actual branch. They had a sort of a proxy bishop in from another ward to help give some strength to the leadership as people were leaving. And now they've finally, far too late, the church is finally coughing up to actually purchase a property.
Just before we get there, Peter, I want to address Clayton.
Yeah.
Is it Gardinier? I want to say that's how you pronounce that surname. And Jason Brown also talking to the comments about how the church will throw their weight around. They will sue Cody, Wyoming, in order to get their temple built, in order to get their golden idol put upon a large steeple, but they won't throw their weight around. It's almost like because there was no one for them to bully, they were like, well, what's the point then? You know,
And
why?
they didn't need to throw any weight around.
They didn't. They just
We
needed to
found
throw some
land
cash
repeatedly.
around. There was land. There was an
Yeah.
architect. There was all these things. They just needed to throw some cash in
Yeah.
it, and the members would
Yeah.
have thrived there.
And,
So I just
Yeah.
the point I think we should end on is what are they doing for Welling now? Which you take it away.
So,
Tell us.
yeah.
Far too
So
late.
I've brought this up every conversation I've had with my stake president for a long time and so on, and this is now the merged stake. And so they finally coughed up some money to buy cheap an old working men's club in Plumstead, which is not the most salubrious area near Woolwich, which they've purchased. So we're talking, and it's kind of a few rooms, I think, at the basement of a larger building. And the promise initially was, we are going to make this bling. We are going to refurbish it totally. We're going to make it look like a chapel. And then they decided, actually, we're not going to bother with that.
When would they
we'll
ever
make
keep a
few
promise
little
to Welling
repairs.
Ward?
I know, I had never. And so they are going to move the ward in there, hopefully at the beginning of next year, but not make much effort to refurbish it at all. And probably at the same time demote it to branch level. I've spoken to some of the old faithful members there, the few that are left, and they're kind of matter of fact. They're so battered and bruised, they're just grateful for anything now, and they're used to this. But I spoke to one who is, very faithful person. I'll keep it all anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And that person is livid. That person said to me, I literally, I can't think about it. I have to not allow myself to even think about this, because he knows perfectly well how the church has shafted his congregation. And like so many others, it's been their life's work, to live there, to be part of that ward, to help it survive and thrive, and then see it decline.
For our American
and
audience, I just want to
that
show them what a
yeah.
working man's club looks like. That's the
Yeah.
inside of a working man's club. Sticky old carpets. There'll
And-
be a bar in there. There will have been some
Yep,
slot machines in
literally.
the corner at some point.
Yeah.
And there will be
and
years
it
worth
has, drum roll,
of problems. Yeah, go on.
4
drum roll.
parking spaces.
Sorry,
4
4
parking
parking
spaces.
spaces.
4
And before you come at us and go, oh, well, London's an urban city. Everyone takes public transit. This is on the outskirts. People are driving. 4 parking spaces.
4. It's the last twist of the knife. It's putting salt in the wound. It's adding insult to injury, and the irony again that this is the kind of stuff we used to rent in the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we began, and as we just heard, in 1876, meeting in a grotty saloon, nice, friendly, cheerful, positive people, very
Grotty
poor.
saloon.
renting somewhere like that. Nothing has changed.
And so after
And
180
this is-
years,
Yeah. How
180
much tithing
years.
do you think they paid in that time? How much tithing has Welling Ward thrown into Ensign Peak and Utah and its temples and all of that?
Mhm.
It's just a
Because
microcosm again.
I don't think we need to. I don't think
the
we need to
larger state
circle
of
the
things.
circle the drain on
Yeah.
that anymore. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching. We'll. I think I'll release some t-shirts, some merch with "Long Live Welling" on them. I think, or something like that. Watch this space. There is merch down below in the description and that sort of area. There's t-shirts with Daniel the Tapir on them, all that sort of cool stuff. You can like this video if you liked it. You can subscribe to this channel if you're new here and you want to see what other fun conversations we have. If you want to donate to the channel, you can donate too. All the good stuff, all the good vibes. I managed to pull off the impossible tonight, which is do an episode with Peter Bleakley that is under an hour long. So that's got to be worth a like, surely. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Make sure you comment, tell me about your experiences where the church has just not seemed to make the right move in terms of getting people a building and helping the saints worship as they should be able to. And until next time, stay safe, be kind to one another, and I have no catchphrase, so bye-bye.